What's up, everyone? Tera Roberts here with 444, and let's talk about risky players that are actually worth drafting. We'll kick things off with Justin Fields. Justin Fields is being held as the heir apparent to Jalen Hurts as the next running quarterback that is going to make a jump to elite. The comparisons are warranted because it's an easy comp, a rushing quarterback that will increase his passing efficiency because his team is surrounding him with talent, and the result will be a high floor with huge upside. But what makes Fields a risky player is that because all of this is happening off the heels of Jalen Hurts' success, you're going to have to make a significant investment to get Fields. Fields has an ADP of QB6 right now, but with Joe Burrow's calf injury, Fields could jump to a top 5 pick. Now, looking at 2022, Fields failed to exceed 30 pass attempts in a single game last year. And that wasn't a huge problem because with his legs, he still finished his QB6. And that wasn't exactly a consistent QB6 finish. That's the little bit of the wrinkle here that makes him a risky pick. Technically, his overall performance was aggressively boosted by his week 9 and 10 performances against Miami and Detroit, where Fields threw nearly a third of his total passing touchdowns for the season and ran out of his mind for two 40-plus fantasy point games against two terrible defenses, Miami and Detroit. Weeks 1 through 8, Fields averaged 16 fantasy points per game, not really worthy of a top 5 pick. Now, jumping over those week 9 and 10 performances, weeks 11 through 18, things picked up for him. Fields averaged 19.1 fantasy points per game. Big improvement, but again, still not a top 5 quarterback. When you look at it that way and you actually break down the numbers as a whole, he actually has to make a pretty significant leap to justify his ADP. So he is very risky, but it is worth it because Fields has a ceiling that is technically higher than Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes, and Jalen Hurts. While players like Allen, Hurts, and even Lamar Jackson have huge rushing upside, Fields' rushing upside is actually on another level. We don't need to have a dramatic increase in pass volume. We just need to see an uptick in consistency. And if that happens, you are talking overall QB1. Moving on to the next player. I am a huge believer in Tony Pollard. I actually love him at his ADP, but I can admit there is some inherent risk in drafting a player who is heading into his 5th year of his career and has always played a complementary role and never had more than 200 carries in a season. When you look at it that way, despite the fact that I love Tony Pollard, I can admit that he is a riskier pick. Tony Pollard is officially the RB1 for the Cowboys, and with Mike McCarthy being very vocal about wanting the offense to slow its pace down and continue focusing on the run, Pollard will have the biggest workload of his entire career. And that's a big deal for a running back that finished as a top 10 back with career highs across the board and did all of that while getting under 200 carries and sharing the backfield with Ezekiel Elliott, who still, despite perception, had a very productive year with 12 rushing touchdowns. But Pollard does have 3 down back capability and legitimate overall RB1 upside. I am drafting him in the 2nd round of fantasy drafts without question. Another player that is seen as a risky investment, but I am actually very comfortable on drafting as well, is Christian Watson. I get why people think he's a risk. Watson has a first-year starting quarterback in Jordan Love on a team that's had the luxury of relying on a Hall of Fame quarterback for years. This is brand new territory. And Watson's 2022 performance screams boom bust player. After a slow start to the season with some injuries, Watson was wide receiver 9, weeks 10 through 18, averaging 17.2 fantasy points per game. But that stretch was really propped up by an insane 4-game stretch, weeks 10 through 13, where Watson was wide receiver 3, averaging 24.8 fantasy points per game. If he operates as a boom-bust type of player, that's a bit uncomfortable for a player that you were drafting as your wide receiver 2. But what makes me lean into drafting Watson is that I truly believe that he's a wide receiver 1 and his floor might be slightly lower than ideal, but it should still hover around 10 fantasy points. I will take that floor combined with a 30-point ceiling all day long. Let's talk about another running back. Josh Jacobs is coming off an insane season of 340 attempts, over 1,600 rushing yards, 12 rushing touchdowns, and 53 receptions for 400 yards, finishing as RB1 in standard and RB3 in PPR. Yet fantasy managers still don't see him as a top 3 back, not even a top 5 back typically. It was definitely an outlier year last year. Josh Jacobs never exceeded 300 carries in his career prior to that. It was definitely the biggest workload of his career and the best fantasy finish of his career, and it's scary to trust a back coming off of a year with such an aggressive workload. If Josh Jacobs gets a similar level of attempts, he will repeat his 2022 performance. And I do believe that's going to happen. Jimmy Garoppolo is set to take command of the Raiders offense in 2023. And while a change at quarterback is less than ideal for receivers, the coaching staff remains intact. And that's the key here for Josh Jacobs' success. There's also fear around the contract situation, which makes him extra risky, but there's no actual advantage for Jacobs to miss time in the regular season. It's worth the risk to secure an RB1 in the second round of your fantasy draft. You can grab a top receiver or Travis Kelce in round 1, and then turn around and draft a player that has true overall RB1 upside. Next up, I have been in on Calvin Ridley all off season, and one of the reasons was low risk factor because of his ADP. But over this past several months, fantasy managers woke up and realized, hey, this guy was literally one of the top receivers in the NFL and started furiously raising his ADP, and now he's being drafted as a top 20 receiver, and he's not falling. When Ridley takes the field in September, it will be nearly a 2-year layoff. That is pretty significant, and we just saw Deshaun Watson come off a long break and struggle to get back into his previous level of performance. So there's a ton that could potentially go wrong here, but there is so much here that could go right, and despite the risk, Ridley is worth drafting. The Jags are a locked-in top 10 offense, and that should only improve in 2023. We know this offense can produce a wide receiver 1, and they just did it last year. And they did it with a player that had never achieved it before. Imagine what Ridley can do in this system. Another risky player that I am 100% in on drafting is Keenan Allen. This one is super easy to break down. The risk is obvious. He's 31. He is coming off a year where a hamstring injury took away nearly half of his season. There's no debating that. And we would be crazy to not think that it's a possibility that that can happen again. But one thing that gives us hope is, despite the injury concern, we saw zero regression in performance when Allen was actually healthy. In fact, we saw peak Keenan Allen. Keenan Allen was wide receiver 3 weeks 11 through 18 once he returned from that hamstring injury. He is being drafted as wide receiver 18. That is insane. New offensive coordinator Kellen Moore will likely push a high-paced offense. Justin Herbert is set for a bounce-back season. Healthy Keenan Allen is still a wide receiver 1. Prior to last year's health issue, Allen had never finished outside of the top 14 since 2017. Now, age cliffs are real, and Keenan Allen could be there. But after what we saw in the back half of last season, I am willing to take that risk. Draft Keenan Allen, pray for those hamstrings, and reap the fantasy benefits. We'll wrap things up with a risky first-round pick that I actually believe is a must draft. Bijan Robinson has an ADP of RB3, and taking a rookie running back in the first round is the definition of extreme risk. But Bijan is 100% worth it. Of all the rookie landing spots, Atlanta was the best case scenario. Atlanta was first in rush attempts, third in rushing yards, 10th in rushing touchdowns, and 4th in yards per attempt. They are a run-first team, and that will not change under any circumstances because head coach Arthur Smith is committed to the run, possibly more than any other coach in the NFL. Bijan won't only contribute on the ground, he will be a strong contributor through the air as well. And that combination is overall RB1 upside. I wouldn't be shocked if we see one of the best rookie seasons ever from Bijan. I know that's saying a lot, but this is the perfect combination of talent and opportunity. Draft Bijan with confidence. Thanks for watching this video. Be sure to like the video and subscribe, and comment below and let me know which of these players you're interested in drafting, and stick around for more off-season content.